All right, we're live. I'm stoked to be doing interviews again. It's been a couple weeks since I've done one, and hopefully everything's working. I've been having equipment issues, and I think I've got them all worked out. But stoked to be back. I am dressed in my work clothes because I didn't have time to change when I got home because I drove to Birmingham today. So that's just the way it goes. But I am really happy to have my guest on tonight. David Britton is somebody that we talked a little bit before the interview, and we don't remember how we got connected, but we got connected. And I had made a note to listen to his album that he released last year called The History of the Universe and forgot. I totally spaced listening to it. And then I was reminded to listen to it, and I listened to it and was totally blown away by it. It's very, very funny. David has been a stand-up comedian for a number of years, and he recorded this album at the Comedy Attic, which is one of my favorite clubs I've ever been to. And he's also a writer, does some comedy writing for places like the Hard Times and other places like that. So I want to talk about that because uh, comedians always need as many income streams as they can to survive, and it looks like he's done a good job of finding that. So I'm going to bring him out right now. It's David Britton. David, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Scott. Like I said, I was just listening to an old episode and really enjoying your Greg Warren interview. So I'm happy to be on the podcast.
Yeah, when I go into these when I listen to somebody's album, I go into it with no expectations because I think you and I both know that some people put albums out before they should, and and with yours, I was so pleasantly surprised because I mean you've got just about everything in this album that you can put in as far as silly stuff, social commentary, just everything that you can put in there, and you do it, and you put it all together in this cohesive album that goes from one bit to another so seamlessly, and it seems to me like it just really drew me in without knowing all that much about you before I listened to it. So really good job with that.
Well, thanks. It was, in hearing your podcast and I, of course, listen to a lot of podcasts where it's two
Mhm.
comedians talking about the process because that's very interesting to us as
Yeah.
comedians. I was talking to my girlfriend just a little bit ago, and she like paints houses for a living.
Uh-huh.
And she was talking about like how she was watching all these videos about ladder safety, and she's like, "It's interesting to me because I don't want to fall
Yeah.
and die." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay, well, that's then you kind of get it. That's what I'm gonna do. This is like
Yeah.
my hour talking about ladder safety to like the
Yeah.
process behind it." Oh, there was a great old TV show with I forget who it was like much like this, and whoever was the host was talking to Jerry Seinfeld, and the Jerry Seinfeld was like, "This show's never gonna work." And the guy's like, "Why?" And he's like, "'Cause who wants to listen to two comedians talking?
Yeah.
Like, what
Yeah.
would be the point?" Which
Right.
I don't think is true. I think it is interesting, I'm being a
Yeah,
little facetious.
and the funny thing is, my listenership is like all over the world, but it's almost all um either aspiring comedians or people who just want to know the behind the scenes, and I enjoy that because I get pretty good feedback from a lot of folks about, I took away this nugget from this interview, and I always
Right.
hope that I give everybody at least something they can take back and get better, because I started comedy when I was 52, and I'm just trying to learn as much as I can to be as good as I can. I don't ever want to be famous or anything like that. That's not my goal, but I just want to make people laugh when I get on stage, and everything I learned from this, I go back and listen, even though I have to hear my stupid voice. I
Yeah.
enjoy re-listening to stuff, and even if it's been a year ago, I'll re-listen and forget what I did learn and make
Yeah.
sure to make notes of it. But uh, let's talk about the album. I want to go there first because I enjoyed it so much. So I really I want to get into the first track and the last
Yeah.
track on the album because
Those are
um
2 probably the most interesting. Yeah,
yeah, and
things.
so I mean, you start off as a drunk comic that is you're kind of play acting as a drunk comic who
Yeah.
doesn't really understand the whole fact that you're doing a set and it's being recorded for an album.
Yeah.
Where did that idea come from?
Well, I think, there are a lot of influences in a lot of places, but one definite influence, and when I say it, comics will be like, "Oh, yeah," is that Rory Scovel. I don't know if you know Rory Scovel,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
amazing comic. He would come out and be, I think, German for the
yeah,
first 5 minutes of his set, and of and he's famous. There's a thing I call comic famous where all the comics know
yeah,
who Rory Scovel is, but
right.
the average person on the street is like, I don't know."
Mhm.
Like, there was somebody I think I brought up John Mulaney the other day, and my friends were like, "I don't know who that is." My
Yeah.
non-comedian friends. So, it's just like, but so you go to this show and you see this guy come out and he's German for the first, like, several minutes, and you're like, you just don't know. And so it occurred to me, and I had seen other things where people would start off, and it just occurred to me that the first 5 minutes or so, no one knows who you are. You could be
Mhm.
anyone and say anything, and if you sell it, they believe it. Why wouldn't they believe it?
Uh-huh.
People don't
Eh,
normally think you're trying to trick them.
yeah. And we talked a little bit before we started recording about the fact that you felt that that was more of a visual bit, and yet I only heard it on audio, and I I mentioned that I understand the commitment to the bit because I was hearing it only on audio. Yeah, it's funny because you're more aware of time passing and the fact that you are keeping this going and you're keeping people on the edge of their seats because they don't know. I can just imagine they didn't know exactly how to react
Yeah.
and and I thought that was really cool because it wasn't necessary. It was more performance art than comedy almost. Even though it was funny, it was, and I compared you to like an Andy Kaufman type bit. There was true commitment there, and I was wondering where the hell is this going to go, even though I knew there were a lot more tracks on the
Yeah.
album.
You're like, "They would have pulled this guy off stage
Yeah,
after if I had done that for." Eventually, they'd be like, "Hey, you need to go."
yeah,
Um, I really, and that's the other thing in that bit I will say is I always, and I say it at the end of the bit, what I'm drinking is, cranberry juice. Oh,
uh,
and this is the thing I really, I've gotta do stuff that makes me laugh, and I think all comics know this. You have to start from, "This makes me laugh," and then you could work from there.
yeah,
Um, but it made me laugh to do it, and I would go back into the kitchen, and I would get, cranberry juice, but in a short glass, so it looks like a cocktail glass, and
uh-huh.
then I would put a lemon, a lime, a cherry, like a sword, everything they had, an olive, just everything into it,
Yeah,
so it would look the most ridiculous I could make the drink look, first of
uh-huh,
all. That was a big part of it for me. So I'm glad you can tell that I'm acting drunk. And the other
uh-huh.
thing is I didn't want to oversell it. I didn't want to be like, "Hi," hi, like
Right,
where
yeah,
I didn't want
you
to
were
seem like a
coherent,
comedian
yeah,
pretending to be drunk. I wanted to seem like a comedian who was drunk.
yeah,
So there's some
y
acting involved for
right.
sure.
Yeah, you pull it off, and how did that evolve? It's obvious that wasn't the first go around with that,
Right.
so how many times did you do that before you felt like, "Hey, I'm gonna put this on the album?"
I think it's one of those bits that it's so weird that it did well the first time I did it. The thing is, you talked about the Comedy Attic being a club you love, and I
Mhm.
was very, very lucky to, when that club started, and it's still in the same place, it was like 10-minute walk from my house. I could walk
Uh-huh.
there.
Yeah.
And so I went there every weekend. I saw everyone. When I started performing, once I did well enough at the open mics that the owner decided I was a comic, you
Uh-huh.
know, I could try stuff there, and it's such a good club that, like, and the audiences there are so good because they're people who come back over and over again. Lots of
Right.
times you're at a comedy club and the people who are there, it's like, oh, this is our first time seeing stand up, or this is our second time ever seeing stand up. But you go to
Uh-huh.
the Comedy Attic on a weekend, 50% of the audience are like, oh, yeah, we come here every month. This is like,
Yeah.
we see comedy all the time. So they are ready and primed to see something different.
Mhm.
So then it worked well the first time I did it, luckily, and that gave me the confidence to, like, do it a bunch of other places. And
Mhm.
I'd seen a bunch of, like, weird comics perform weird, like, kind of bits before, so it gave me the confidence to keep doing it.
Mhm.
So, yeah, by the time the album came out, I had been doing it for, like, a year or 2, something like that.
Mhm. And let's talk about the Comedy Attic a little bit because I've only been able to go there a couple times, but both my kids went to IU and were, they were regulars while they were in school. And there's some sort of magic about that club that you know, I had Todd Glass on a few
Oh, I
weeks
love
ago,
to yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's his favorite club, and, Marin goes there to work out
Yeah,
new stuff, and they all say that the club itself is just magical, and the way it's run, and it's a true comedy club, and I think that's why they bring people back over and over again, because if you go to a average run-of-the-mill comedy club, uh, that there's going to be people who don't behave like they should, and
sure.
it's gonna fuck up the comic, and everybody's going to be it's just not going to be the experience that you would expect from a comedy club. And yet the Comedy Attic is like, hey, this is how you're going to act when you walk in here. You are going to be appreciative of the comics.
Yeah.
You're gonna sit there, you're gonna laugh, you're not gonna talk, keep your phones in your pocket, all that type of stuff is
All the
pretty
things
much
you
set
wish they
out.
would say at every club, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but they really back it up, and, for some reason, that atmosphere, I think when they started it, they probably had to enforce it, but they've created an atmosphere where when you walk in, it's just kind of like common knowledge that you have to act like you are, an adult human being, and even if
Yeah.
you're drinking, don't interrupt the comic and let them do their thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a cyclical thing because, like, they started out that way, and Jared, the guy who owns it and runs it, is very well, that's I don't know what's going on. I think my iTunes just suddenly decided, like, I'm gonna start playing something.
Oh, really? I'm
I
not
don't
hearing
know.
it, so that's good.
It's probably and weirdly enough, it was my album somehow it decided to start playing. It's like when the label sent me that was very odd. I don't know what was up with that. Uh, anyway, what was I so Jared, who owns and runs the club, is very, very particular about how things go. So he
Mhm,
was like that from day one, and then that made the club good, and then that made regulars who would come, like, every week or all the time, and then those
mhm,
people already know. So, yeah, and then that made the club better, so it was just this cycle of, like, everything's gonna be and, I mean, there's still hecklers and people there sometimes. It's not perfect, but and it's interesting you mentioned Todd Glass because for a while, the video at the beginning of someone being like, "Don't be on your phones," don't was Todd Glass. He
yeah.
recorded it for the club going like and, Todd, everything's a tangent of a tangent,
Oh,
so
yeah, yeah.
that video was the video for, like, a year or 2 of him being like, "Oh, and by the way, if you're upset by this now, then you're probably the person we don't want here, and
Yeah.
everyone else around you is enjoying what I'm saying, and they're going, 'You know what, Todd? You're right.'" And it's just this
Yep.
great I'd love to see that video again, actually.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to ask him to send that to me if he's got a copy because I mean, he's one of my all-time favorites, and
Oh, me
he's
too,
just
me too.
yeah, he's a nutty, nutty, nutty guy, and I love him. But so you I'm gonna jump to the last bit because I think it's the longest bit on the album, and
Yeah.
I know this is like a lot of sweat and blood, and this is like all of your creative consciousness just rolled into this bit because it's almost 10 minutes long, and I want to hear about the evolution. I want to hear how this whole thing started, and the last bit is called the history of the universe, where you give your version of the history of the universe, which is just absolutely hilarious.
Well, thanks. I'm glad you like it because a lot of audiences. I worked on that bit one whole summer, and I told
Mhm.
myself how it started. There's this show in Indianapolis, Indiana, called "An Evening with the Authors," and
Mhm.
this guy Jim Lugers came up with the concept. And I remember him messaging me and being like, "Do you think it would be funny to do a show with comedians pretending to be authors?" And they'd come up and they'd make up a character and then they'd come up and read a chapter from their fake book.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, yes, that's the best idea I've ever heard, obviously.
Yeah.
And so we would do it like once a month. We would do, and they're still doing it. It's called An Evening with the Authors. And so I did the first one. I would do it almost every month. I
Mhm.
loved that show. And one time I decided I'd write the history of Indiana is what I'd do.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And I thought it would be fun to do the history of Indiana, starting with like, how far back do I want to go? I'm like, oh, I'll go to the Big Bang and get it through to, I don't know, Mike Pence. I don't know. So the genesis of that bit was me writing the first part where I'm like, second one, the Big Bang. Like, uh,
Mhm.
and then, we did the show, and I think it only went so so when I did it at that
Mhm.
show. But I liked it myself. And I'm like, well, I want to develop this. So I want to turn it into its own thing.
Mhm.
And I was just so determined. And I would do it at shows, and sometimes it was the wrong audience and they'd hate it. And
Mhm.
sometimes it was the right audience and they'd love it. But I never gave up on it.
Mhm.
And at the Comedy Attic, they would do every summer in place of the open mic, they would do a summer long because the students are gone, so they need to do something
Yeah.
that'll bring in a lot of people. So they do a summer long contest where every week you go up and you make it from round to round.
Mhm.
And I thought to myself, if I make it to the finals, I'm doing my history of the universe bit.
Uh-huh.
So I just kept working it every place I went, and I kept adding to it, and I would think about it all the time. I spent a whole summer, maybe a whole year thinking about that bit
Yeah.
and just adding to it. And then when I got to the competition, I'd actually won the competition the year before. And so then also I felt more, and you hear comedians say this all the time. Once I got a little bit of success, I felt more free to really experiment. And that club
Yeah.
is good for experimenting. And I'm like, if it's going to work someplace, it's going to work here. So I made it to the finals, and that's the bit I did at the finals. And
Uh-huh.
it was 10 minutes, which is how much time you got.
Right. I, uh I guess I appreciate the amount of, comics. I mean, they're trying to get 10 minutes of decent material for, like, their first 3 years anyway,
Yeah.
and the fact that you put that much effort into that 10-minute bit, it really shows, and the the fact that you made that the made your album that title, and you ended on that bit, it just seemed to really work well with all the rest of the material that was with it, because even though it's a standalone joke, it
Uh,
seems like your comedy persona kind of took it to that point where, I mean, you start out drunk, and then
yeah.
then you build to this, and the level of weirdness is really set up perfectly by the way the album goes, because this album, you get, it's pretty obvious that you get steadily a little bit more weird
Yeah.
as the album goes, and it really made a good ending to that album. And I actually re-listened to it, I think, 3 times, just so I could get make sure I heard everything that I was missing when I was changing lanes and stopping at stoplights and stuff like that. So
Oh,
it
well,
was
you
really
probably
good.
heard it more than me at this point
Yeah.
then. That's not true. I had to listen to it a bunch when we were editing it,
Yeah.
so
Now, as far as the album concerns, I always like to try to get into the nuts and bolts of putting an album together because I know that it takes first of all a lot of work, and second off, you got to find the right people. When
right.
you had the idea for the album, from the time you had the idea to the time you were able to release it, how much time was that?
Oh, man, it took forever to release, and, this was not actually my first album, but it was my first full-length album. It
Okay.
was my first album on a major label.
Mhm.
I mean, On Tour Records is I don't know if you would even call it a major label because most people haven't heard of it, but it was a real label where I don't wanna say my friends' other things weren't real labels, but they were much
Yeah.
smaller.
Yeah.
This is a label that had, like, Stuart Huff and other, like,
Mhm.
who's also one of my favorites. I don't know if you know him, but that's a guy you should definitely
Yeah,
check
he
out.
was my second interview. Yeah,
Okay, well, great.
yeah,
Well, then you know.
I love Stu, yeah.
So the I wasn't planning on doing an album exactly. What happened was that I had moved to New York and I was upstate New York
Mm,
because my girlfriend got a job upstate New York teaching. And I'm like, oh, I'll go down to the city all the time, which didn't end up being, you
uh-huh,
realize that that's not really tenable.
yeah,
Uh, but I was out here and I was doing shows and I was doing shows in like Albany and like Kingston, New York, and it was fun, but it was just like being in the Midwest in a lot of ways. But I was just keeping my chops up and trying to keep writing. And then Jared called me from the Comedy Attic, and I think probably someone canceled. And I had
mhm.
featured there a bunch, and he was like, "Do you want to come headline?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'll check my calendar." And he's like, "Come again?" And I was like, "I mean, yes, of course, obviously." He was like, "What are you saying? I just asked you to headline one of the A-list rooms, and you were like, 'Let me check my calendar.'" And he's like, "There's nothing you're doing more. Are you having a baby?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, you're exactly right." So and I knew, Ross from On Tour Records from I'd recorded one other thing with him that was supposed to be a compilation that didn't end up going anyplace,
Mm,
and, I just knew him from he had put out my friend, Matt's album. So I knew I was gonna, like, have 5 shows to try to get
mhm,
it right. So I emailed him. I'm like, "Hey, I'm headlining the Comedy Attic." He had been complimentary about some of my past sets and
mhm,
said nice things. So I was like, "Hey, will you come record this weekend for me and maybe put out an album?" And he was like, "Yeah, sure."
mhm.
So it was never me like, "I'm gonna put out an album," but I'd done, like, long headlining sets before, so
Yeah,
I had it. Yeah, so that's just how it so I was like, "Yeah,
okay,
I'll just go there and we'll see what we get."
that's cool. Now, your style of comedy is I like to think of it as more, calculus than, just simple addition and subtraction because you're not a one-liner, and you have longer bits that have a ton of tags in them that keep the laughs going, and you build to a crescendo, you let them breathe a little bit, and then you bring it back up again. I know it's almost like music when you try to do that kind of stuff. How did you get into that particular way of writing and performing? Because it's by far the hardest way to do it, and still be a like a headlining type draw because you just have to be really good at it, and those tags have to be really strong.
Yeah, I actually love one-liners, like, when I started out, I think I wanted to be Stephen Wright. I'm like,
Uh-huh.
he's one of my faves, and I have actually a ton of one-liners that didn't end up on that album because they just didn't work with what I was doing in that case,
Mhm.
and lots of times they don't. You know what? You say it you said it's harder to do this, but in a way, one-liners are very hard to do
Oh,
because you just have to remember so much more.
yeah,
Like, I was like,
right.
I can remember these, like, if I'm doing like a 25, 30-minute set, I'm like, I've got to do these 7 or 8 bits. I got to remember
Mhm.
those. If you're doing one-liners, you're like, I have to remember these 100 bits. Like Emo
Right.
Phillips is another guy who's amazing
Yeah.
and can do like bang, 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 bang.
Mhm.
Obviously, Mitch Hedberg. Uh, and I love those guys. And so for me,
Your mic just cut out.
can I help you? My computer is just like
Yeah,
being weird.
your mic cut out a little bit there.
Oh, yeah. Siri came on, is like, can I help
Oh,
you?
okay.
I should probably stop saying her name. It's like, what do you want? And I'm like, I want you to go away. I can't even. Yeah. So what I was saying, like, it's laziness in a way that, like, if I have an 8-minute bit, if I have 5 8-minute bits, then I only have to remember there's those 5 things. And
Yeah,
then the
but
tags come naturally.
you gotta make those 8-minute bits. You've gotta throw a lot into those 8-minute bits to keep people leaning in.
Yeah, you gotta make people laugh some comics will say, and it's a valid argument that you need so many laughs per minute or
Yeah.
every few seconds or whatever. I think actually I think it was Stewart who once told me, is like, you don't have to get so many laughs per minute. You just have to make sure they're not bored.
Yep.
You
Yeah.
can't be boring,
Yeah.
you know? And he's a great guy who's super funny, but can also like be serious for like a minute, which is
Yeah.
forever on stage, and
Right.
have people like come along with him.
Yeah. Yeah, he's very good at that, and well, he's a master at it.
Yeah.
It's amazing. He used to, he used to do when I was up in South Bend, he did the Drop Comedy Club quite a bit, and
Oh, I've done
I
that a few
always
times. Yeah.
really enjoyed when he did that club because he would come up with a notebook of brand new stuff and just say, "Hey, I'm just gonna riff for a little while. Let me know how you like it." And it'd be so cool to get that stuff the first time or the
Yeah.
second time or whatever. And one of them is what he's worked on the whole hour about the uh, the history, his whole hour on history, and it's just
Yeah.
it's really cool to be on the precipice of that and see how it comes together.
Yeah, I think that album, I can't remember what he ended up calling it, but I saw him working that, and he was at some point during the set, he says humans will fight maggots for a bad idea,
Yeah.
something like that. And he was thinking about calling the album that, and I really I was like, that's such a great name. It's so
Yeah.
like do it. And it wasn't like sellable, probably, or he probably
Yeah.
just didn't like it. Like Stewart doesn't give a shit about sellable, I don't think anyway.
No,
So
he doesn't.
he just probably
Yeah.
liked the other title better.
Yeah, no doubt. So I jumped right into the album, but I did want to know how you got into how you first started doing comedy, what brought you to do it, and when you started and how it all came about.
Oh, well, I always loved stand up. Like when I was a kid, I'm guessing we're around the same age. I don't know, but like I
No, we're
remember
not, there's no way we're even close.
I'm 46. Oh, you're 52, you said.
I'm 57.
You're
Yeah.
57.
Yeah.
Okay, well, but still, in the comedy world, like where I started
Yeah.
at 36, which was also like kind of late to start.
Uh,
Everyone's in their 20s now. I go to these
yeah.
shows and like you feel like I still with these 20-year-olds, I have more in common with them than people my age just because we're comedians. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
I can
feel the
talk to
same.
you
Yeah.
easier than my guy who's like my same age who's a dentist because what are we
Yeah.
gonna talk about? But then they'll bring up shit where I'm like, I don't know what you guys are talking about now. You're choking each other during sex? That's
Yeah.
like, um, I can't remember what we. Oh, so becoming a comedian. So Yeah, I'd always loved it, and, like, I'm sure you remember then, Comedy Central, before it was Comedy Central, was the Comedy Channel,
Yeah,
and all they showed was stand-up, like, it was
right.
almost all they showed was stand-up, and so you turn it on, and it would be, like, stand-up clips, stand-up specials, and
Mhm,
I would sit there and watch it for hours, and but then it never occurred to me that's a thing a person could do. My
mhm,
freshman year of college, which would have been like 94, 95, something like that, there was a
mhm,
contest in, like, the student union commons area. I'm, like, 18. I get up there, and I do jokes out of, like, my childhood joke book, like, I bought, like,
uh-huh.
and I think I stole I in fact, I'm sure I mentioned this on another podcast, I just straight up stole the Paul Reiser joke. I'm 18, I feel horrible about it now, but I was just an idiot who didn't I fully admit to being an idiot at that age. So but then I won the contest, and I think I got, like, $50 or
Uh-huh,
something, and then never did it again for, like until I was 36, and they opened the club. Well, it was a Funny Bone, and then became the
yeah,
Comedy Attic, and my friend Matt, who I mentioned before, who's been I should mention that Matt Alano Martin has been super helpful to my career.
uh-huh,
We knew each other as, musicians before that, but he was running a little show, and he asked me to do it, so I went to Indianapolis, and I did, like, an open mic to try it out, and it actually all comedians are also like, "Oh, my first few times were horrible. I sucked. I can't believe I kept." But actually, my first few open mics went well enough that I was like, "Oh, I could probably do it." And then later, I bombed harder than anyone ever has.
uh-huh.
I have. Oh, I know everything is turning into a tangent, but I will say this: when other comedians talk about bombing, I'm always like, "Oh no, what happened? Are you okay?" And they're like,
Uh-huh.
"Yeah, man, just no one laughed." And I'm like, "That's it? Shut up. No one booed. No one good went, he needs to get off stage." And then the whole audience clapped. That didn't happen? Well, then shut up. Like
You
that,
don't
when
know
I bomb
bombing. Yeah.
yeah, when I bomb, it's so like people are I feel like lots of times when you bomb, and I've had this too, the audience is rooting for you. They like want to laugh. They're like sometimes it'll be like, huh, like they want you to do well,
Yeah,
but you're just not getting them. But sometimes when I bomb, it's like we're mad at you.
yeah,
We hate you,
yeah.
and like it's just it's rough sometimes.
Yeah, I can see you, I can see you turning an audience, and I
Yeah,
respect that about comedians that can do that. Just have them totally turn on you and start throwing their drinks at you and stuff, and I
yeah.
think that's I think that's as entertaining as laughing for me. So, I
There was one
I dig
night
it.
in Lexington, Kentucky, I think it was Lexington, where I was bombing so hard that you felt this they hated me. First, they
Mhm,
weren't laughing, and then they
mhm.
actively hated me, and then there was this shift where, like, this is kind of fun. We hate this guy so much
Yeah.
that we're kind of having fun again. Like,
Uh-huh.
I could feel that. And then they lit me from the back finally because it was oh man, that show was crazy. My friend Charlie was doing I hope you don't mind that I'm just turning everything into a tangent of
No,
like
I prefer tangents. The less I talk, the better.
I disagree, but so anyway, my friend Charlie's doing this and it was a contest too, and she shouldn't have been in it because she's very funny, but it was like you're supposed to be clean and she's like the dirtiest comedian.
Uh,
But she's great, but
was it Charlie Hester?
it was Charlie Hester.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and, all her songs are about her saggy boobs and,
Yep.
like God, I miss Charlie. Uh, but anyway, so she's like, "Come do this with me," and I told him you were coming, and I think she had really built me up, like, as, like, some amazing comic, like, that
Uh-huh,
they would be lucky to be in the room with me, and so I got there and they're like, "Oh, do you need any you're gonna close out while we're counting votes, do as much time as you want. Thank you so much for doing this." I was like, "Oh, yeah, no problem." They, like,
uh-huh.
thought I was a superstar, and then I went up there and immediately in Lexington, Kentucky, I think I did an abortion joke, and they
Yeah.
were immediately off board and they lit me from the back that they were done counting votes, and I'm like, I'm gonna do another 5 real quick just to fuck with him, and the guy was like, "No. No, you're not." He didn't think it was funny at all. I thought I had gotten to the point where I thought it was I always wanna do well. This is a
Yeah.
thing that Jared and I had talked about, is I think he's and other people got the impression that, like, I was trying to, like I always wanna get a laugh. I'm
Mhm.
never not trying to make people laugh. That's always my goal. Sometimes I fail so miserably, and I try to save it in this way that only makes things worse. But that's what was happening that night.
Mhm.
And oh, the other thing was is they were taping the show, and I wanted a tape of that show so bad. Next to my album, it's the recording I most wanted. And I went to the
Uh-huh.
guy, I was like, "Can I get a recording of that?" And he's like, "Well, I don't know." He was pissed at me. He was just like, "I don't know. I don't see, and I messaged him. I was like, "Please, I'll pay you just to get,"
Uh-huh.
because I thought it was such a specific, like, weird moment. But I never got a recording of it. I wanna see it
Oh,
again.
that's too bad, and
Does that answer your question that neither
yeah,
of us
it
can
does,
probably
and
remember anymore?
yeah, it I haven't been to the point where I've totally turned an audience completely against me because I mean, my stuff's pretty innocuous and pretty clean, but I envision myself really leaning into it and just totally making them hate me. Not just not laugh, but just absolutely hate me if I ever got into that situation.
And I'm
And
not trying to make him hate me. I'm like, "Oh, maybe they seem to not like me and I'm not doing well. Maybe if I say this thing
uh
that I think is funny in this moment, that they'll think that's funny."
mhm.
Like, I think, like, in that moment, like, I did an abortion joke and they didn't like it in Lexington, Kentucky, and I'm like, "Oh, I know some of you are mad because you probably should have been aborted."
Yeah.
And I was like, maybe they'll like, that seems ballsy and they'll appreciate it, but
Uh-huh.
no, it was the
No.
exact the people walking out and but that was me trying to save it, and it didn't work.
Yeah, yeah. So starting when you were 36, what were you doing before you did the stand-up? You said something about music?
Yeah, I was playing drums in bands and, I was working like a day job,
Yeah.
and I was playing music because I love performing, like, I think of myself as a creative person, not that I'm, like, great at, like, but that's what brings me joy is, like, creating stuff and then, like, presenting it somehow.
Mhm.
So, yeah, and I got to the point where I was a decent drummer, I was never great, but I got to the point where, like, I was solid anyway,
Mhm.
and then I tried stand up, and that I it went well, and I was like and then it got to the point where I started to get offers to do shows on the weekends, and I had to make a choice. I couldn't it was unfair to the other members of my band to
Mhm.
constantly be like, "Oh, I gotta cancel rehearsal again. I gotta cancel" I wouldn't cancel shows if we had them booked, but I'm like, "I've gotta cancel rehearsal again because I'm gonna do this show," or they'd be like, "Hey, we got a show, if you could do it." I'm like, "Oh, no, I already have a show booked at this other
Mhm.
place." So I just had to ma and also I was going broke, so I sold my first year trying to do it professionally, I sold everything I owned. I sold my drum set, I sold my bike, I think I like anything that was worth more than 50 bucks, I sold.
Yeah. Now, when you start later, I mean, I started much, much later, but when you start later like that, so we all see the 20-year-olds that are doing it, and
Yeah,
we all know that they have to do, a certain amount of dick jokes and eating
yeah.
ass jokes and all that kind of stuff that is it's almost like it's almost like a requirement, like Boy Scouts or something like that, that you have to get your merit badge for doing really shitty jokes
Sure,
that
and not
everybody
that
does.
sucking dick and eating ass isn't hilarious. It's
Yeah.
I mean, sure, I'll give it to him. You gotta say
But
something that someone hasn't said about it though,
right,
so
right. But at 36, you've had some life and, hopefully a little bit of maturity. Do you feel like it was a little bit easier for you to get better quicker because you started later?
well, I mean, I've eaten a lot of ass in my time, first of
Okay.
all,
Well,
let's get that out
yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Uh,
Don't we all? Yeah.
yeah, uh I don't know, like, all I could ever do is what made me laugh, and maybe there was some of that I was I still have a 5-minute chunk that's about my dick, like, it's
Uh-huh.
a I Um, we were talking about your interview with Greg Ward that I really loved, and like, there's some comedians who are like, "Oh, trying to do this thing stylistically," and you said some nice things about my album where like, "Oh, you're doing this interesting, weird thing, or you're doing this thing,"
Mhm.
but comedy is hard enough for just to like I've gotta think it's funny, and then I gotta convince you as an audience member it's funny, that I've never tried to find like, you hear comedians talk about, "I found my voice," and great comedians who I love have said that, but for
Mhm.
me, it's already hard enough that the only thing I can ever do is like, "Oh, this thought occurred in my brain and it's funny to me, and now I'm
Yeah.
gonna say it to the audience, and if they laugh, I'm done. Because
Yeah.
those 2 steps, that 2nd step is hard enough
Yeah.
without me adding a 3rd step of, like, I have to build a persona, or I have to be a clean guy, or I have to be a guy who talks about weed or
Uh-huh.
politics, and that's why that album is kinda all over the place because there's some
Yeah.
weird bits. I talk about politics. I'm sure I talk about sex. It's
Mhm.
just like that's what was funny to me that day, and so that's all I can do. I've never really tried to build a persona or voice. Like, my voice is just my voice, and sure, it's an amped up version of me.
Mhm. Now, when you think about the not really having a persona. What do you think about what's your writing process like then? Because you say it has to be funny to you. Are you like a hardcore writer that you write a certain amount of time every day, or how do you put your stuff together and how do you bring it to the stage?
I used to write in notebooks a lot more. Like, I had notebooks full of stuff, and
Uh-huh.
I believe, like, and this sounds so pretentious when I say it, but I think it's true that comedy is more akin to poetry than prose, by
Yeah.
which I just mean every syllable means something. Like, when you said
Yeah.
plantar fasciitis is just a funny, like,
Yeah.
word, it's
Yeah.
true. And, like, so babies laugh at, like, just when you go like, "Blah, blah, blah."
Yeah.
Like, there's a certain sounds that make but babies might not laugh when you go like, "Rrr?" Like, I don't know, like,
Yeah.
there's certain so I really used to I would sit down with a notebook, and I would be like, "Oh, that's too many syllables," or that, like, it just doesn't
Mhm.
it has to flow in this very specific way. But now, more what happens is I have a germ of an idea and just whatever's handy. If it's a piece of paper and pen, or if it's my phone, I just jot down one sentence or one word even.
Mhm.
And then theoretically, what I try to do is get on stage that night or as soon as possible. And I'll talk it out in my head in my car. That's how I
Uh-huh.
wrecked my car, is I was like two in my head trying to go through this bit in my head. But then I'll try to talk it out in my head and however I can, and then try to get on stage as quickly as possible and just be like, "Here's as formed as it is.
Mhm.
What parts do you guys laugh at? What parts do you not laugh at?"
That's so funny because I actually am doing the same thing now because I used to do the same thing. I would write everything out and then it had to be perfect before I would even do it at an open mic. I had to feel it was perfect and all the unnecessary words were out and everything
Yeah,
was just put all together and I I decided that e especially moving when we moved, I decided that, you know what, I'm gonna put a premise. I get premise ideas all the time,
yeah,
and I'm going to put it in my phone, and I'm going to go on stage with four different premises, and I'm going to work them out. And if I get any inkling of a laugh, then I know I can do something with
yeah,
it. If it doesn't go anywhere, then that premise is probably either not good or I need to totally rework it. And I guess I feel freer when I do that.
yeah,
I don't feel like I'm stuck in a certain amount of words or I'm pretty good at minding the clock and understanding, I always have, I always know what my opener and my closer is, and then I can throw stuff in between it. And uh, toy around with it, and I don't know, I feel more creative when I do it that way than when I'm just sitting there writing.
Yeah, yeah, there and, like, you're right, I think it's good to start out that way and be like because you understood the same thing, it was like every word and syllable matters in some way,
Mhm,
and then I think once you've done it for a while, you start to do that on stage, like, it kind of forces you to say things, you've been on stage enough, you kind of realize the mechanics more, and then you can mess around a little
mhm,
bit more after a while, and then once I've done a bit long enough, it does start to be more like, "These are the exact words, and this is how this bit goes," and I can mess
right,
around in between it, but when I
yeah,
get into the heart of the bit, then it's pretty much word for word because at that point, I've boiled it down to, "This is the right way to do it."
right, yeah, and it it seems like it seems like you almost it feels better when you know you've got something, even if it's not fully baked, than if you spend all that time on writing and then you get up there and say you've put 5 hours into a particular bit, and then you get up there and you find out it just totally sucks.
Yeah.
Whereas if you come up with a premise and you just mess around with it a little bit, then you can go back and make it into something when you know you've got something.
Yeah, comedy is so weird in that, like, you can work forever on something, and then you have to have enough detachment to be like, "Oh, I put all this work in, but that sucked, and
Hmm.
I either need to fix it or throw it out," you
Hmm.
know? You have to both care the most and also not give a fuck at the same time, and
Hmm.
that's really hard to do.
Yeah. I'm getting a lot of different opinions about where comedy is going post COVID, and the some people say it's going to blow up and be as big as the '80s, and some people say it's going to go by the way of TikTok and YouTube and stuff like that. Based on what you're seeing out there, what are you seeing as what's changed and what's stayed the same, and what's gotten better and what's gotten worse?
Um, People seem hungry for live comedy, and I
Hmm.
think people seem hungry for live events,
Hmm.
probably. I have a bit that I've been doing a little bit where I talk about how like, "Oh, you never have to leave your home even before COVID because there's
Yeah.
Netflix and there's YouTube and there's Grubhub and there's DoorDash and there's like you can see the best comedians in the world and
Uh,
get any food you want. Like, you can watch Nate Bargatze and order Arby's delivered to your house, and I don't
yeah.
know what I'm gonna do, like, that's gonna be so but there is I think I also do a little bit of acting, and right now I'm doing a thing where we're playing, like, a vaudeville, duo,
Uh-huh.
me and this woman, and she wrote the parts for it, and at the end, we talk about how, like, there's something about being in a live audience, and I think there's always gonna be that. I don't think there's a replacement for being like, you can see a holographic Tupac now,
Yeah.
sure, but
Yeah.
there's something about being in a live audience and being in the room with the person, whether it's music or comedy.
Mhm.
So, I believe, and I don't think it's just wishful thinking, I believe that that's a special thing that's not going anyplace.
Mhm.
As far as comedy itself is concerned, I politics always change. Comics will complain like things are too PC or you can't say this, but I mean that's always been true. It just changes every 5 to 10 years,
Yeah.
There's always like no one's getting, Lenny Bruce got arrested, we're not getting arrested. So,
Yeah.
you can say cocksucker now, you can't say other things.
Right, yeah. Thinking about, coming up, when you were starting and through your career, what do you think is the best piece of advice you ever got?
There's one really simple one that my friend Scott, told me. He was li and this is just a real simple thing for comics starting out, is
Mhm.
like, wherever there is on stage where you're blinded by the light and you can't that's where you're supposed to be standing.
Uh,
He told that's just a real and I think a lot of advice that I could have gotten is more esoteric and harder to, but that's a real simple one. It's like the reason it's so bright there is because that's where you're supposed to stand.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Um, so that's, if you're a new comic listening to this, there's an easy one to implement.
Yeah.
Um, my friend Ben Moore, and maybe someone told this to him, he said to me, like, if it's not going to make you quit, it doesn't matter. Like, I have bombed harder than anyone, and I don't mean to brag, but I've bombed harder than I think anyone in this industry. Where like a theater literally full of 300 people were like, "Boo, get off!" Like, and I
Uh-huh.
didn't quit. And then I went on to record an album and get the headline and get to do lots of cool stuff. So it's kind of true. If you're not gonna quit, it almost doesn't matter. Good things matter and they advance you, and bad things almost don't. If you're not gonna quit, it almost doesn't matter.
Yeah, I like that. I like that, idea that, I've never really thought of it that way, but, yeah, it really makes sense, and
He said that to me, and he also said what I think is good advice. He said, "You have to care the most, uh, all the time you're off stage, and the second your foot hits the stage, you have to not give a shit."
uh-huh,
Which is kinda true. I think there's some nuance in that, but I do think there's more than a grain of truth in that. There's
uh-huh,
something to that, where you put in the work, you put in all the work before you step on stage, and then when you get on stage, you have fun.
uh-huh. Yeah,
So,
yeah, that yeah, that's good stuff, I like that. Now, you have been able to take the stand-up and turn that into some writing that you do for, like, hard times in different places like that. How did that occur?
the hard times, I had done a show with them. Well, if you wanna, the hard times basically, they have a very open application process. You just go to their website, you can find, you click on the right link and it says, like, "Send us 10 or headlines, and
Mhm,
if we like them, then we'll put you in the group and you could pitch." So you just have
mhm,
to, and you can apply as many times as you want, I think. I had met those guys. I saw them. I did a showcase for them. So they say it doesn't help because people would ask me like, "Oh, can you get me in?" And I would ask my editors. I'm like, "Oh, this guy is really funny. Can he?"
uh-huh,
And they're like, "Yeah, just send him to the website." Like, they don't care. That's what they
yeah,
say. They're like, "We don't care if your 10 headline pitches are good. We're gonna basically hire you."
yeah,
And I was looking for jobs when I started trying to do stand up professionally. I was just like, I got to make some money because I had sold
yeah,
everything. And like, I'm like, but I wanted to do something related. So I was looking for writing jobs. I got a weird job writing for this movie website where I was like commenting on movies for pay.
uh-huh,
And then a friend of mine was a writer, and she's like, "Oh, this one website is hiring." And I sent them, it was the Daily Dot, who I wrote for. That was my, like, 50% of my income for a while, was writing for the Daily Dot.
uh-huh,
And I got into writing stuff that wasn't necessarily comedically related. It was like viral news stories and memes. Like,
mhm,
it'd be like, there's this weird new SpongeBob meme that everyone's posting. Like, research it, figure out
uh-huh,
where it started, why people are posting it, who made the first post, how it evolved. And they're like, research it and write it up. And I would think I was making like $10 an hour or something doing
oh,
that. And so I got good at, and the deadlines were real quick. It was like, write something, some viral news story would happen, and they'll be like, and I'd get it in the morning, and they'd be like, we need it by 2 o'clock today. So I'd have like 5 hours to research it and write it. So I got
uh-huh,
writing very quickly. Um, so I got to where I could write,
uh-huh,
and it was a steep learning curve. Like, I messed up stuff all the time.
yeah,
One weird thing, you and I are older than these young whippersnappers out there, but I always remember it was two spaces after a period before you start the next sentence. That's what I
yeah,
was drilled into my head. And now suddenly they changed it. They're like, no, it's one space now. And
yeah.
my editors would be like, stop putting two spaces. And I'm like, this was drilled into my head my entire like adult life. And now I got to unlearn it.
Yeah, yeah,
And now you hit the space bar twice and it automatically puts in a period. I sound
Yes.
so old right now. I'm like, "I don't understand these
Yeah.
beeps and boops."
These darn word processors.
Yeah, this word process. Well, even this time, I was like, "I don't know what's going on with my computer, Scott. I'm sorry. It's not."
Yeah. Yeah, computers are definitely elusive, and all the shit I have on my desk is elusive. Since I moved, there's like a ghost in the machine. It seems like something breaks every day, so it's a lot of fun. Um, One of the things I like to ask everybody is, what 3 things do you know now that you wish you woulda known when you started doing stand-up?
Oh, man, that's a great question. Uh, I think that I should have known it's okay, like, the thing I said about failing, like, it's fine. You're gonna
Yeah.
be fine. You're gonna bomb, like, you're gonna think you're horrible, like, it's fine, you
Mhm.
know? Also to not this is, I think, good advice that, my friend Tom had given me early on. I wish he had known just to shut up and listen to people sometimes. I thought I knew more than I did early on. Like,
Yeah.
we were on some show and it's Tom Takar who who's now a very successful comedian,
Mhm.
but we were put on some show and the guy running it had put Tom on like second. And I'm like, I went up to him and I'm like, you should have Tom closing. He's super good. Like, and Tom was
Uh-huh.
like, hey, don't go up to, sometimes you're even right, but you don't go up to the person booking the show and tell them like how you got
Yeah.
to choose your battles to some extent.
Right.
And as comedians, what I think some of the club owners and bookers don't know is that we're in a club or a show night after night after night after night, and or at least we want to be. And then they're only in their club. So we're like, oh, I've been to 10 clubs, this month, and that thing, the clubs that do this, it works. The clubs that do this, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so you want to go to the club owner and be like, hey, don't do things the way you're doing them because
Yeah.
I have seen this other thing work way better.
Yeah.
But they're going to be like, shut up, kid. You don't get out of here. You're the host. You're lucky to get that job. Don't tell me how to.
Yeah.
So you just have to. I don't think I was being unhumble, but I was trying to be like, oh, I understand this stuff now. Where lots of times I didn't.
Mhm.
If you just go up and do your job the best you can, which is make people laugh, and you are just humble and polite, then it's fine if you bomb. I know
Mhm.
I've lots of times when I've booked shows, I've picked comedians who were like, if a comedian's funny but they're a jerk, I'm like, I'm not booking that guy.
Yeah.
Or if he's a know-it-all or whatever, I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't wanna I'd rather work with this guy who's funny but not great than this guy who, like, kills but is a jerk. Like, I don't wanna work with that guy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So just be humble, just shut up, go on stage, do your jokes. Don't necessarily try to be funny off stage. If you have something funny to say it. But don't
Yeah.
be in the green room try like you get to feature for Pete Holmes and you're like, "Oh, I gotta make Pete Holmes laugh in the green room." Pete
Yeah.
Holmes doesn't care. If you go and do well on stage and he happens to watch your feature set, he's gonna care about that. He's
Yeah.
not gonna You're gonna annoy people if you're trying to be funny backstage sometimes.
Yeah. I totally agree with that one. Nothing bothers me more than somebody who is on all the time.
Yeah.
It just it irks me because that's not the person. That's not them because it takes so much effort to be on and just mellow out. Be a
Yeah,
human
calm
being
down.
for a while.
Yeah. Of course, the flip and I agree with you, and that's what I was saying, but there is a slight flip side where it's like, "Oh, but I am kind of like this." Like, I didn't choose comedy because I wasn't already, like, mouthy,
Yeah.
like,
Right.
I talk and I, like, am goofy anyway, so
Uh
there's a certain part where, like, "Oh, I am like that." But, yeah, you're exactly right, like,
Yeah.
just mellow out. Just
Yeah.
calm down. You're probably with some headliner who's been, hungover for 2 days and, like,
Yeah.
would like to sit there and, like, have some fries backstage.
Yeah. They need some quiet time.
Yeah.
Um, Great talk. I really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better. And I'll just say it again. The history of the universe is it's a very, very good album, and it's
Oh,
one
thank
it's
you
one of
so much.
those. I don't listen to a lot of them several times through, but it's one of those that I think I'll put on. Other times I'm driving and I don't have a podcast or something to listen to, just
Yeah.
because there's some real craft to that one, and
Oh,
I
well, that's so
I I
nice.
really I really enjoy the effort that you put into it.
Oh,
Where can
well, that
folks?
means a lot to me.
Yeah, yeah, and you you did it right. So I've listened to a few albums, and uh, uh, then not had people on my podcast because I listened to the
You're
album.
like, "Oh, this is what you wanted to present?" Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, no.
Yeah.
So where can people find you if they want to see your socials and all that kind of stuff?
I had a website for a while, it crashed, and I never figured out how to fix it, so,
Uh,
but you can find me on both Instagram and Twitter at Lasersaurus, which is laser with a Z, which I know is
mhm.
not correct, but S was taken. It's Lasersaurus, like a laser dinosaur.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I will say, another thing that I did for a long time, and I don't think my name is even on it, I just did, um, I got the URL storiesaboutwizards.com,
Uh-huh.
and there for, like, 2 years, every week, I would write another short story about a wizard. So, if that sounds like it's up your alley, definitely go to storiesaboutwizards.com. I don't make any money for it, but it
Uh-huh.
does my heart good.
Yeah.
Um, I also have a podcast called "Do You Know What Time It Is?" with David Britton,
Okay.
where my friends pretend to call me in the middle of the night and wake me up. So it's me constantly being like, you hear the phone ring and me being like, "Huh? What? What do you want?" And then one of my friends would be like, "Dave, I just bought a whole box of popsicles and I think they're gonna melt. What should I do?" And I'm like, "I don't know. It's 3 a.m." And then they'll hang up, and then my next friend will call. So that's called "Do You Know What Time It Is?" It's on all the regular stuff.
Uh-huh.
So listen to that. That would be great.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to check that one out. I didn't see that when I was doing my internet stalking of you, so I'll have to make sure I make a note to listen to that.
Yeah, I hope you like it. I want people it's fun, and it was a way during the pandemic to connect with my friends. And so, yeah, I hope you like it.
Yeah. Well, I really, really enjoyed having you on the podcast, and I wish you the best of luck, because you're definitely unusual.
Oh, thank you.
You've got a really unique point of view, and I can't tell you how much I love listening to that album, and I can't believe I sat on it for like a year before I listened to it.
Well, so did the label. It, like,
Yeah.
sat around for you. That's the thing, we can't get into it now because 'cause we're at the end, but, like,
Yeah.
they were so sweet to put it out, and it was really great, but it was
Uh,
also like, there was a bunch of people ahead of me, so it took a while to come out.
yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I wanna say that this was really fun for me too. Like, I guess I love talking about myself, but,
Yeah, yeah,
no, you're a great host and, like, very, nice and generous, so
yeah.
this was really fun.
Well, thank you. I really enjoy doing this and meeting folks like you. So thanks for being on the show,
Of
and